Hello, everybody, and welcome into the Couch GMs podcast. I'm your host, George Kerth, and I'm all dolled up here with the other two Powerpuff Girls, Tyler Snyder.
What's up, guys?
And Cody Roadcap.
How's it going, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to another week's episode of the Couch GMs podcast. If this is your first time, thanks for joining us. But if you were wondering what the Couch GMs is, it's a podcast by three best friends who met in college, love football, talk football every day, just want to provide a little entertainment and insight for you.
Absolutely. And you can expect some weekly breakdowns and predictions on every one of our episodes, some fantasy advice, bold predictions that we will most likely get wrong. However, our record is improving. And we're just going to have some fun talking football.
Well, it's not too much fun for George and I. If we look back to last week, Tyler, you demolished the picks going 13-1.
Yeah, it did.
I went 10-4, which is typically a good week. And George went 8-6, and that is why he is all dialed up. Tyler, you have a commanding lead, 72-29, 11 games out in front. So it looks like you're pretty safe for the season-long punishment.
I love it. I love to see it, honestly. You know, the funny thing is, some of these games I'm so on the fence with, and I really only pick a certain team because, you know, since I was on the fence, you two picked the other team, so I'm like, I'll just pick the other one. So thank you guys for handing me a good record.
I guess you're welcome, but not really. But we can talk about our bold predictions real quick. Hey, we got another one right. George, congratulations.
Hey.
You said CMC would go for over 150 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he squeaked by with 151 yards, but he didn't escape that game healthy. Let's just talk about that real quick. You know, CMC is finally back, but it doesn't appear to last long. We're still not fully aware of the full severity of his shoulder injury, but CMC owners, it's been a long season, and it's not looking good.
No, I mean, you might actually have seen a couple of people that dropped Mike Davis in some leagues after you seeing that CMC was coming back last week. If you are a CMC owner and you happen to be in a league where that happened, snatch him up because it seems like CMC could be missing a couple of weeks. Early reports say he's week to week. So, I mean, they have a bye coming up. I could see him coming back after that, but he could be an impact in the fantasy playoffs. So he's also might be a little bit of a trade target for you guys as well.
You also got to keep in mind that with the Panthers most likely out of the playoffs at this point, since they keep losing games, there's also a good chance that the Panthers just take it easy and shut him down for the rest of the year, save him for next year, because there's really no point bringing him back and getting him hurt again if they're not going for anything.
That's a very good point. The only thing is, you know, the NFL and the owners did approve if they miss a big game, essentially, that they'll expand the playoffs to 8 teams, and Carolina does still have a fighting chance for the 7th or 8th seed. So, I mean, they have a lot of ground to make up, but that could keep them wanting McCaffrey back, but they also have to look long term.
Sorry, guys, why don't we transition into quarterbacks here, and let's talk about the Washington football team for a second. I don't know if you saw the Redskins took another NFC.
Whoa, not the Redskins alert.
The football team. Come on, George. We're politically correct on this show.
The football team lost a quarterback this week, and Alex Smith is back in. And it appears that he's going to hold the starting job, as I don't think there was any faith thrown in Dwayne Haskins. Do you think it's the right move for them to stick with Alex Smith for the season?
I'm actually pretty surprised that they have just completely abandoned Dwayne Haskins completely. They used such a high draft pick on him, and I understand he hasn't worked out maybe the way that they were hoping. But at the same time, what quarterback has stepped in and shined the way they were hoping Dwayne would? I'm surprised they completely abandoned him. I thought with the injuries, maybe they would bring Dwayne Haskins back in. But it looks like they're going to move forward with Alex Smith. And, you know, I don't know if it's the right move or not, but I'm glad to see Alex Smith getting this opportunity after his long road back.
Yeah, like I'm very happy for Alex Smith. You know, he's fought through a lot to get back into playing shape, being the starting quarterback again. But I don't understand the whole situation with Dwayne Haskins. You know, he was the top 15 pick. He was named the captain at the start of this year. I mean, we talked about Kyle Allen being Rivera's golden boy when he got the starting job, but for no consideration, just going right to Alex Smith, it seems like a weird situation there in Washington, and hopefully Dwayne can get traded this offseason and get a fresh start somewhere else and not turn into another Josh Rosen.
Really do not want to see Dwayne's career go down the toilet because of them benching him out of nowhere. But let's talk about some other quarterbacks that are seemingly coming out of nowhere. There's been a couple of quarterback injuries, and Jake Lewton and Garrett Gilbert went off this week. What do you guys think about those two?
Well, I thought Jake Luton was the surprise of the two of them, and I don't want to discount any of the rookie quarterbacks that are balling out either, but we've seen that for a couple weeks. So Jake Luton throwing his name in the hat of rookie quarterbacks balling out. We saw DJ Chark revitalized. He was just making big throws. It almost didn't seem like the moment was too big for him. You could say the same thing about Garrett Gilbert. He looked pretty good in that almost upset, but you still saw moments in that game why he was on the streets for so long. So I think Garrett Gilbert balled out uh, against Pittsburgh in that matchup, but we already saw Stephen Jones say that once Dalton is back, he is their quarterback. So I don't know how long we'll get to see Gilbert continue.
I don't know why though. Like, why would you stick with Andy Dalton when you saw how bad this offense has been doing? And I know Garrett Gilbert's not your future either. It's not like he's some young guy straight out of college. I think he's almost 30 years old too, and he's bounced around in the AAF and whatever. But at least you saw your team play for the guy. Like, Andy Dalton got hurt and no one even seemed to care. At least that team showed some heart for Garrett Gilbert. I think if you want to have any chance at making something positive out of this season, they should just keep him in.
Yeah, absolutely, George. With the whole, I don't understand the situation either. Why they're going with Garrett Gilbert, but it almost sounds a little bit like back in week 2, week 3, when Anthony Lynn was like, "Nope, we're going to stick with Tyrod Taylor," and or Justin Herbert in that case kept balling out, and then it's like, "Oh no, we're going to go with Herbert." Like you said, Gilbert's not a long term option, but if Dalton can't get back after their bye week or Gilbert continues to impress, I just don't see how they can continue with Andy Dalton as their quarterback, even though their season is pretty much already over. That's enough, though, for weekly headlines. We'll get into a few other notes later in our game picks when we talk about each game. But before we get there, let's talk some fan questions. We had one come in. Apparently, the guy has been struggling with some injuries. He gave a list of 5 players, 2 wide receivers, and then the flex spot. So he needs to fill out. So he's got Curtis Samuel, Rashad Higgins, Antonio Brown, Debo Samuel, and Mike Evans. What are your guys' thoughts on which 3 you would start this week?
I would start by saying Mike Evans pretty much has to be a lock. I understand that he didn't have a big game last week, but really the Bucks' offense was just non-existent. I didn't see Antonio Brown get enough targets to the point where I would be like, don't start anybody else on that offense. I think that Brady will have a bounce back week. I think Mike Evans has to be in there, so I can lock that one in.
Yeah, I agree. I think Mike Evans is the lock. For me, it'd be Debo Samuel if he's healthy. I think he'd be an easy number 2 choice, again, as long as he is fully cleared and back. And then I actually like Curtis Samuel with the news of McCaffrey most likely not playing this week. If for some chance he does play, that would move Higgins up there, and then Brown would be 5th on that list for me. How about you, George?
I'd agree with you guys with Mike Evans being the lock. I'm between Curtis Samuel and Debo Samuel being the 2, but either way, it would be 2-3 there for me. And if Debo's injury happens to hold him out, I know he's got a hamstring thing going on, it would be Rashad Higgins at number 3 then. Antonio Brown, good stash, I guess, but there's too many mouths to feed in that offense, and it just looked like he wasn't quite ready, so I could not trust him in fantasy at least for a couple more weeks.
Absolutely, George. I couldn't agree more. All right, guys. Well, I think that wraps up our fan question for this week. So let's go ahead and get on to this week's matchups. Just a reminder, everybody, we do post all of our picks after the show. You guys can comment, tell us who you would pick, who you don't like that we pick. So let's go ahead and get on into the first game, which is my favorite game of the week. Surprise, surprise. We have the Indianapolis Colts at the Tennessee Titans on Thursday Night Football. Who do you guys have in this matchup?
I'm going to take the Titans. Um, if you're a longtime listener of this show, you know there's not a single one of us that have been high on the Indianapolis Colts. That continues throughout this matchup. I mean, the Colts defense is pretty good, but I still think Derrick Henry will have his way. A.J. Brown is looking better than ever now that he's getting back and healthy from his injury. The Titans defense is a little suspect, but I don't trust Phillip Rivers in any way, shape, or form. So give me Tennessee.
I'm going to go with Tennessee here as well. They played really well against a good defense last week. I know that they started to blow that lead a little bit at the end, but that makes me think that if they can still put up decent points against the Bears defense, that the Colts defense doesn't really scare me either. And the Colts offense is suspect. I don't care that the Titans defense has struggled a little bit. I think the Titans just are the more well-rounded team. The only thing that would scare me is divisional. You know how divisional games can go either way, but the Titans are just the more complete team. Derrick Henry's going to have another good game, and he seems to really love Thursday night football. Just ask the Jaguars. Don't know if he's going to go for 200, but he could be racing back to get that rushing yards lead by the end of this week.
And it might be the bias in me, but I think one player that we need to talk about a little bit more is A.J. Brown. This guy has been absolutely phenomenal since coming back from his knee injury. Now, I would say that A.J. Brown should be on the same level as DK Metcalf when you are talking about quality at the actual receiver position. I'm not talking fantasy, I'm just talking about the receiver position. Metcalf gets so much love because he's a big physical guy and his run after the catch ability is amazing and he can high point and he's tough and tell me any of those things that AJ Brown can't do as well. I think he needs to be discussed right along with DK.
Oh yeah, I mean we talked about that big list of receivers that were taken before DK, and I think the one that is at least close to living up to the expectations is AJ Brown. The Titans did not miss on that pick last year. He's been a difference maker for them since he came back from injury for the Titans and for fantasy teams. It's been insane. He really is not talked about enough. You're right.
It's just that small market atmosphere. They don't get the media hype like a Seattle does or other big teams. But before we move on, I just want to get your guys' thoughts on the Colts' background. We mentioned the Titans' defense it's near the middle of the pack. It's not the best. It's not the worst. Jonathan Taylor is coming back from a little bit of an ankle injury. He seems to have lost some carries to Wilkes. What is your guys' thoughts on that backfield? Are you playing any of them from a fantasy perspective, or are you trying to move any of them?
It's Jordan Wilkins, not Wilkes. But yeah, Wilkins took some of the carries, and Hines is still getting some of the pass catching. But at the same time, I think that if you're going to start a Colts running back, it has to be Jonathan Taylor. He's the guy that they're going to in the red zone. I think that he's just been light the last few weeks because of the fact that he's been battling that ankle injury. But I think once he's fully healthy, he's going to be a good guy to roll with in fantasy. He might even be a good guy to target right now in trade because with his last couple of weeks not being so stellar, you could be able to get him cheap, and he could be a definite fantasy playoff asset.
Took the words right out of my mouth there. Tyler was going to say everything from the injury to, yeah, he might be splitting carries, but I think it's going to be back down to a 2-horse race once he gets back healthy, and Wilkins is not going to be really significant. And I mean, he's taken all the touchdowns. So I'm with you. And we're talking about trade targets. Just hang around after the game breakdowns. We might talk about a couple more trade targets. Maybe we're going to come back to him. But now, why don't we move on to the another Couch GM's favorite team? We're going to look at the Jacksonville Jaguars at the Green Bay Packers. Guys, you saw how Lewton played last week. Do you think he's going to be the new guy for the rest of the season in Jacksonville?
That's a tough question for me to answer at this moment. It's kind of hard to judge off of one game, but Minshew didn't look great. We come to find out he has a broken thumb, so there's some expectations for it. I think if Luton gets the job over Minshew, it's just basically them saying, "Hey, we're going for a quarterback with our top 5 pick. Minshew's not our guy." If Minshew gets the job, it's solely, I think, just because they want to give him one last chance to prove that, hey, maybe we can draft an offensive tackle or a wide receiver or something and continue to build with what Minshew has going on. But from this game perspective, they have the biggest spread of the week. Everyone knows I'm a Packers fan, so I'm definitely taking Green Bay. But I do want to talk about the weather. It's supposed to be a rainy, windy day. We saw what the weather did a few weeks ago for Green Bay when they played Minnesota, a team that they were supposed to blow out. James Robinson, from a fantasy perspective, could be a great add. And then DJ Chark, if Jair Alexander, who is battling in the concussion right now, is out, DJ Chark is a must start, in my opinion. But if Jair Alexander does play, I wouldn't start him. So make sure you're watching those injury updates the rest of the week.
Yeah, going back to the whole quarterback question, the Jaguars were actually saying that they weren't high on Minshew and they were ready to bench him earlier in the season. And I think when they were talking about benching him earlier and then Luton comes out and performs well, I think it just almost seals the deal that Minshew is not going to be back as the starter if Luton continues to perform. Now, you can't forget that he was playing against a very, very poor Texans defense and Texans team in general. Now he's going up against a much better team, a playoff team in the Green Bay Packers. I think that his future as the starter for this season completely hinges on this game. If he gets blown out and shows that, it really was just because he was facing a weak team, Minshew might be back. But if he comes out and he performs really well and actually makes this a very close game against the Packers, you can pretty much consider this Luton's job for the rest of the year.
I'm with you, Tyler. I feel like Luton has a chance to prove that he is the guy the rest of the year. And I know we talked about Jacksonville last week on our midseason breakdown show, and I thought that Minshew would have a chance to, play out the season and see if he's the guy or not. And that clock might have run out a lot faster than I thought. But Cody, I like how you mentioned the weather as well. And I know you're a big guy with the West Coast teams coming east. I feel like I should start the trend of South teams coming north in the winter. Like that normally doesn't go well either. And we're looking at that potential cold wind, brisk Green Bay game here coming in November, and Jacksonville, who's basically plays down in the tropical climate. That's a tough situation for them.
Yeah, luckily though, it's only supposed to be like in the mid 40s, so it's not the full coldness that you expect up there in Green Bay, but definitely rain in the forecast. So be a tough task for Luton. Rodgers definitely has the upper hand there. But let's move on. That's a pretty easy game. Green Bay should win that one pretty easily. But let's stick in the NFC North with the Detroit Lions as they host the Washington football team. The football team are 4-point underdogs. We talked about at the top of the show, Alex Smith should get the start. Matt Stafford is back practicing after a neck injury he suffered on Sunday. He's a full participant, so he looks good to play. If Matt Stafford plays, I definitely think Detroit can win this game.
Yep, I agree with you. I'm taking Detroit in this one. I think that Washington's defense is going to cause some issues for Detroit, but yeah, give me Detroit. I think it's going to be an easy win.
Detroit, I think I could see them in a blowout if they had Galladay. It's hurts them a little bit without it. But yeah, if Stafford goes, I think it's going to be Detroit easily here as well.
So let's just say Stafford doesn't return. You guys still like Detroit with Chase Daniel? Does that make it closer for you? What are your guys' thoughts? The hypothetical Matt Stafford doesn't play.
No, honestly,
Chase Daniel.
if Matt Stafford is out, I'm going with Washington. Chase Daniel was a quarterback for the Titans for a year, and we had some injuries. Chase Daniel had to start, and I watched this guy play, and he is horrible. He is a terrible quarterback. I can't believe that he still has a job in the NFL. If Chase Daniel is named the starter for this week, give me Washington.
I'm going to jump right on that same bandwagon. He was a quarterback for the Eagles for a year as well, and I could not stand when I had to watch him in the preseason. I would pray he didn't have to come into a game. Washington's defensive front could eat him alive. At least Stafford has that veteran presence in the pocket, and I think he has the ability to get the ball out of there even when he's under pressure. Do not have that faith in Daniel.
Well, Daniel didn't play for the Packers, but he did play for the Bears, and he wasn't very good. But he was as good as Trubisky. So anytime we can take a shot at the Bears, we do it here on the Couch GMs podcast. But that's enough for that game. We're all taking Detroit. That'll be our picks for the week, whether or not Stafford plays. So make sure you're following along on social. But the next game is the Houston Texans at the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland coming off a bye, supposed to get Nick Chubb back. We all saw Houston last week in a shootout with Jacksonville, so I don't think any of us are going to take the Texans. So let's talk about the Chubb versus Kareem Hunt dynamic. I know they worked well earlier in the season. Do you still think going forward that they can both be started from a fantasy perspective?
I think so, and I definitely think so because of the fact that Odell Beckham is out. That it actually helps the value even more. The Browns showed that they want to be a running team. They were earlier in the season, and nobody could seem to stop it except maybe Pittsburgh. So I think once Chubb is back, they're going to hand it right back off to him. Kareem Hunt's still going to get plenty of opportunities. I think that both of them are definitely startable in fantasy.
I agree. Both of them, I think, are going to be startable in fantasy. Chubb's going to be the lead guy, but in his first week back, I would not be shocked to see him a little bit more limited, seeing Kareem Hunt carry the load. So you're going to see Kareem Hunt as that borderline RB1 and Chubb as that flex play, but it's going to flip back to Chubb being that RB1 and Kareem Hunt being the flex play in at least a week or two.
And then from the Texans standpoint, we're starting Watson, we're starting Fuller. David Johnson did leave the game with a concussion. I know Duke Johnson was a popular waiver pickup, and to this day, it still messes with my head when I see him. I'm like, how is David Johnson a free agent? And then you click and it's like Duke Johnson. Besides the point, what is your confidence level in either David Johnson or Duke Johnson this week from a fantasy perspective.
All right, Cody, I'm actually going to take your question. I'm going to take it one step further. I'm in a league where I am desperate at running back. I am just decimated with injuries and underperformance, and I had to pick up some free agent running backs, and I have no idea who to start. So I have J.D. McKissick. I have uh, Duke Johnson, who we just discussed. There's also Wayne Gallman out there available. There's also guys like Matt Breida, Malcolm Brown, uh, Rex Burkhead with the possible Damian Harris injury. Is there any one of these free agent running backs that you would trust in your lineup moving forward? Help a brother out.
Out of the group you just said there, I think JD McKissick would probably be my favorite. It's always good in a PPR or half PPR to have the running back that catches some passes, and that's his job there in Washington. The matchup's not bad. Detroit's defense isn't great. So this week, even I would probably say go with him. Duke Johnson's also, this week possibly a play for that same reason because of catching passes. But if David Johnson plays in any capacity, you have to throw him on your bench.
Yeah, I'm going to go with trust isn't the best word to use for any of the guys you listed. JD McKissick does seem to have, a pass catching role, especially with Alex Smith taking over. Malcolm Brown, and I'm sure Cam Akers is out there. Those are interesting names coming off a bye, but the Rams backfield is so up and down, you never know what to do there. So I would say this week would be McKissick or Johnson based on their matchups, but going forward, I'd probably look for and hope that one of those Rams running backs end up taking a step forward with Henderson batting a little bit of an injury as well.
All right, guys, thanks for the help. I will definitely take your advice into account setting up a lineup this week. Guys, just a reminder to anybody out there listening, if you have some need for lineup advice for your fantasy team, if you're unsure of who to start, don't be afraid to reach out to us. We will answer your question all the way up until game time. We will try to get you the best lineup and try to get you to win some games. So now let's move on to the next matchup. We have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Carolina Panthers. The Panthers have been a surprise this season. They have looked better than we expected, although they are missing CMC yet again. And Tampa Bay, my God, they were favored to beat the Saints, and they came out last week and just disappeared. That was one of the worst games I've seen anybody play this year. And to think that it was from a team that's as talented as Tampa Bay is just unbelievable. Do you guys think that Tom Brady and the Buccaneers have their bounce back this week?
I think that their biggest problem last week was trying to force the ball too much to their new toy and Antonio Brown. And he was not ready for that. And I mean, there was plenty of other problems. You don't lose 38-3 because you're trying to force the ball too much to one guy. There was other problems. But Tom Brady has shown resiliency in his career. This Buccaneers team is way too talented to lose to just anybody. I think maybe the dream team curse is hitting them a little bit. And when they play a team that's been together longer and is actually talented, you see that happen, which is what happened in New Orleans. They have a lot of homegrown talent there. They are no joke of a team. But against a team like Carolina that's kind of not fantastic, Tampa Bay is going to rip them teams to shreds. So I think they do have a bounce back this week, but long term, I think that Saints game might have exposed them a little bit, and maybe they're not quite meshed enough as all these new free agents thrown in there to compete with these top tier teams.
So, Cody, let me ask you. Tampa Bay is so deep with talent. There's Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown, Rob Gronkowski, and you have the running back split of Ronald Jones and Leonard Fournette. With all of those mouths to feed, are there any of these guys that you trust at all right now, moving forward, moving into the fantasy playoffs, or do all of them make you nervous?
I think all of them make me nervous just on the fact there is so many mouths to feed. The guys I like most rest of season would be from the running backs. I like Leonard Fournette over Ronald Jones. I know some people are back and forth, but that's just my personal opinion. I think Fournette, especially after getting blown out, I think they're going to try to stop putting all the weight on Brady's shoulders. From the receivers, though, you got to keep with Mike Evans. He gets the end zone targets, and touchdowns are the most important thing in fantasy. I've never been a huge fan of Chris Godwin. I wasn't drafting him before the season. The injuries, he scares me. I do think the Brown Brady thing eats into some of his targets, and Brown will see some more. So I actually like Brown as option number 2 in the pass game, and then a toss up between Godwin and Gronk back and forth, who gets more targets that week. George, you mentioned they haven't played well against some teams. They barely beat the Giants the week before. They got blown out last week, but we've seen them look good some weeks. So this team is so hard to judge right now, and either projecting them to win games or who's going to be good in fantasy. So this is definitely a team you have to pay closer attention to as the season goes forward, because the media is just going to tell you the Bucs are the best team in the league, even though we've seen repeatedly that they can be beaten. But I'm still picking them to beat the Panthers this week. So
All right, guys. Well, I think that's enough about that game. So let's go ahead and move on to one of my favorite things in the world this year, an NFC East matchup. Boy, have they been exciting. So we have the Philadelphia Eagles at the New York Giants. George, you are a resident Eagles fan. Tell me about this game. Tell me who you like. Tell me why I should watch it.
Because you're actually going to see some playmakers on the Eagles coming back. Don't get too surprised. I mean, they might not be back for long, but you could see a couple of guys this week that you haven't seen in a while. I think the biggest impact out of the group would be Miles Sanders. That's big for fantasy owners. That's big because the Eagles don't have a running back over 4'2" on the roster besides Miles Sanders. So you're going to see maybe a little bit less of the weight on Carson Wentz's shoulders because they can put a little bit more on the running game. Alshon Jeffrey might be back finally. And I never thought I would say this from the moment that they signed him, but it might be a moot point because the wide receiver crew that they've been putting out there, I think, needs to keep running out there and making plays and building on that for the future. The Giants are not a fantastic team, and I'm optimistic because of the pieces the Eagles are getting back. So I'm definitely going to take Philly in this one.
I'm going to take Philly as well. I do think Philly is the better team, even though they've played some terrible games of football this season. I just don't really like the Giants. Daniel Jones, it's not the guy, in my opinion. They need some work going forward. I think Philly's the better team. I do like that you pointed out that Jeffrey might be back, but how important is that? Because he pretty much plays the same role as Travis Fulgham, and Fulgham's been balling out. So I don't think they're going to take Fulgham off the field that much for Jeffrey, but you never know with Dougie P calling plays there. He likes to do some weird things. And I was going to make my bold prediction this week, but I didn't. It's going to come up later in the show. But I was going to make it that Daniel Jones gets a 70-yard run and doesn't fall. But so
Wow.
that's a reason to watch.
Wow,
Daniel
okay.
Jones highlights that they'll show multiple times during the game because of their last matchup. It's a reason to watch this one.
Well, guys, I'm actually going to pick against you mainly because I don't really think that this is such a one sided game in Philly's favor. I think it's closer than that. And since it's that close and both of you guys are picking one team, I'm going to go ahead and pick the other. I'm going to go with the Giants in this matchup. I think the Giants are not the better team. I think the Eagles are the better team. But the Giants are playing with some heart lately. They look like they're playing with more passion in these last few weeks than they have earlier in the season, and they've looked a lot better because of it. And it's actually kind of exciting to watch. I mean, Logan Ryan had battled some tough personal issues this past week with his family, and he came out in the game and played unbelievably well. Got the game sealing interception. I like what I'm seeing out of the Giants rallying behind that kind of a thing. Also, the last time the Eagles and the Giants played, the Eagles barely won because of a last second Boston Scott touchdown. So we can't just pretend like this game is going to be that much different. I mean, if the Giants are able to prevent that last second touchdown, they're the winners. They might even be ahead of the NFC East right now, based on how momentum shifted. And at the same time, we also got to think of what field they're playing on. The Giants' home field has been brutal on people's legs this year. More people have gotten injured in that stadium than any other stadium this season. And you have the Eagles, who are the most injury prone team in the NFL, coming into that stadium. I'd be worried of a lot more Eagles injuries. And because of that, I'm going to go with the Giants in this one.
The Giants have officially taken out 2 NFC least quarterbacks already. Carson Wentz is the one left standing. Please, someone bubble wrap his leg before the game this week.
Well, you said you want to take some weight off of Wentz's shoulders and put it on some other players. I don't think you could put weight on anybody's shoulders or they might break.
Oh, wow. You're not wrong, but I might argue a little bit on most injury prone team. For me, the Eagles have been injury prone, but the most injury prone team is still the Chargers. So let's move on to their matchup with the Miami Dolphins, who took some heat when they decided to bench Fitzpatrick, but Tua looks like the guy that everyone was expecting. Chargers are 2.5-point underdogs. I'm sure they'll find a way to lose yet again. I think Tua continues his hot streak, and Miami comes out of there with a victory.
Chargers. Can you please stop losing close games? You're getting worse than the Atlanta Falcons. I might be a little bit bitter because that game coming down to that last second 2 drop touchdowns is what made me lose in the picks last week. I would have been tied with Cody. But I've been picking the Chargers and Steve in the Faith for a long time because they're such a good. I think they're actually a better team than their record, and I think Justin Herbert deserves a lot of credit despite him not being able to just finish these games off. But I can't do it anymore, and Tua has been exciting, and I'm gonna go with Miami for that reason.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and pick against you guys. I like doing that, so I'm going to do it again. I'm going to go with the Chargers in this one. Yes, the Chargers have been finding ways to lose games at the end, but at the same time, just like I said with the Falcons earlier in the season, anytime you are talking about a team finding ways to lose games, it means that they were in them. So that means that the Chargers are still a very good team. They're good enough to stay in these games. I'm still not 100% sold on Tua. He had one exciting game, one game where his defense carried him. I need to see more out of him before I put too much trust in him. I really like what I've seen out of Herbert. I've seen enough out of him this season to put some trust in him. So out of pure quarterback matchup, I'm going to go with Justin Herbert in this one and pick the Chargers. Also, I find it funny that we were discussing most injury prone teams and we said the Chargers and the Eagles and nobody mentioned the 49ers. That's just crazy.
Well, I think the 49ers have been injured a lot this season, but the Eagles and the Chargers have track records of injuries.
That's very true.
So that's
Well,
where I was going. But before we move on, I just want to talk about, you mentioned the defense of the Dolphins beating the Rams essentially. Tua didn't do too much. And that's the credit to Brian Flores. I think he's a name that will start to get into the Coach of the Year conversation, definitely deserves it. I think his defense and the way he's coaching is playing lights out right now. So I think between Tua and the defense, that's why I did pick the Dolphins to win this game. And what are the Chargers doing in that backfield? We talk about it every week, but I feel like every week it's like we need to talk about it because last week, Kalen Ballage, who has been cut by the Jets, the Dolphins, and is now on their practice squad, got all the work, and he's still in the practice squad.
I don't even want to just focus on that backfield. I just want to look at the whole team one more time because look at those last 2 touchdowns or last 2 throws to the end zone when the game was on the line. And they threw the ball to Mike Williams. Okay, I can agree with that one. Mike Williams is a solid player for your team. And then who the heck was the tight end they threw to on the second
Parham.
play?
Threw it to
Parham. Yeah.
Parham.
Keenan Allen, somebody, something, Hunter Henry, please.
It's very confusing. I mean, if you're talking fantasy, unless you're talking about Keenan Allen or Justin Herbert, there's really nobody on that team that you can start with any kind of confidence. Not even Hunter Henry, none of the running backs. I wouldn't even say Mike Williams because he's there one week, gone the next. If you're talking fantasy, Herbert, Keenan Allen, that's it.
I hold some faith that when Austin Eckler comes back, he's going to have some fantasy relevance again. But I'm right. I'm right there with you for fantasy. It's just those 2. But even just from a team perspective, I don't want to put the game on the line in Parham's hands. I would rather put the game on the line in one of my studs' hands.
The end of that game, it was just crazy because you expect it to go to Keenan Allen. I mean, maybe that's what the Chargers were thinking. Maybe they think, we expect it to go to Keenan Allen, so the other team's going to expect it to go to Keenan Allen. So let's go to the other guy. Parham's a big dude. He was in one-on-one coverage. I don't understand the call to throw a fade in general. Those never work. So why are you going with that?
Yeah, let's talk about that. Fades at the end of the game on the goal line, third, fourth down goal line fades. We need to get them out of the NFL. They drive me crazy every time a team does it. Like, run one of those legal pick plays, run crossing routes. Stop just throwing it up to guys like Parham because he's the tallest one out there, or Jimmy Graham, even though he's so old he can't jump. Like, these offensive coordinators are geniuses or get called this, and then the game's on the line, and they're like, we're just going to throw it up and hope.
Amen. On that play, you had 4 receivers in the bottom of the screen, and the person that was set up to catch what would have been technically a screen was Keenan Allen. I think that would have made sense.
I think there's a lot of plays you could have went with. I mean, honestly, we've also seen guys who are considered offensive geniuses like Andy Reid and Dougie P just draw up some kind of a trick play in those kind of situations, and a lot of times they work. I don't recommend going the Miami Dolphins route, having your punter throw a touchdown to your kicker, but we've seen that work too. Yeah, just
Dude, do you
honestly, I
have to
don't.
bring the PTSD out here? Come on.
I saw a highlight of that again today, and it just made me laugh. I forgot about the play, and it was just beautiful to watch. But yeah, honestly, you can go with a trick play if you're too afraid to just straight up throw it to your best guy. I don't understand why you would go fade in that situation. There's so many other options. Or even if you have like 3 plays to try to get that touchdown, and on the first one you want to try a fade, fine. But when you only have one chance and you're just saying, let's just throw it up, makes absolutely no sense.
I'm in the camp, get rid of all fades. Like, they work like one out of every 75 to 100 times, I feel like. PFF can probably tell you more accurately than I can, but it seems that way as a fan watching the games. But that's probably enough of us bickering about what the Chargers did to lose the game. Let's talk about another team that came right down to the wire in the Denver Broncos. They were also unable to pull it out, and they're going to take on the Las Vegas Raiders this week. They're 5-point underdogs. It appears we are split again. I'm going to take the Raiders in this one. I just like the Raiders at home. I think it'll be a close game. I think Josh Jacobs continues to look decent. Still not fully understanding why seems like he disappears for parts of that game and they played Richard so much. But anyways, give me the Raiders in this one.
I'll never understand teams that have really good running backs and they decide to play the backup too much. Shout out to you, New Orleans Saints. You have Alvin Kamara, and you're like, no, we're gonna go with Latavius Murray way too much. Like it makes absolutely no sense to me. I hate that. But no, I'm actually gonna go Denver in this one. I'm gonna pick against you, Cody. Denver looked good early in the season with Drew Lock. They were clicking. Drew Lock got injured. There was some other injuries there as well, and it looks like the Broncos were just kind of struggling to find their footing and find that connection again once he came back. It looked like they put a fourth quarter together a few weeks ago. It looks like they put a second half together this past week. So if the trend continues, it looks like they're getting closer to putting a full game together. And if they can, I still think the Denver Broncos have enough talent to win the game, especially against a team like the Raiders. We've seen them upset some of the really good teams, but against lower end teams, they don't impress me. I still think Gruden is a horrible head coach. I think he's going to find a way to lose the game as well. So give me Denver in this matchup.
I originally had the Raiders in this game, but I'm actually going to go with Tyler here and go with Denver. Denver had absolutely no running game last week, it seemed like. Drew Lock was their leading rusher, and I don't think that can continue too much with Melvin Gordon and Philip Lindsay now that they're both coming back and, getting more acclimated with their roles. And the Vegas run defense is very bad. So I think that is going to be the difference maker between them losing last week's game against the Falcons and winning this week's game against the Raiders. They're going to be able to run the ball a lot better. So I'm going to go with Denver on this one.
I completely understand why you guys are going to go with Denver. Like I said, I'm going to stick with the Raiders, and that could be because I just got this gut feeling. It's time for my bold prediction that we're going to see not one, but 2 deep bombs to Henry Ruggs. He's going to pull in at least 2 40-plus touchdowns, and it's going to change that whole dynamic of the game, in my opinion. So if you have Ruggs this week, maybe start him, maybe pick him up in daily fantasy.
All right, there you have it. Bold prediction. So moving on to a matchup that's not quite as bold, the Cincinnati Bengals and Pittsburgh Steelers. We all have Pittsburgh in this matchup. It's not surprising. I don't think we really need to discuss much on this game. I just want to get our weekly vent session from George talking about how the Steelers are not good but continue to win. So take it away, George.
Well, Tyler, I was going to try to avoid the Pittsburgh Steelers hype train this week, but since you're hyping it up, let's just go for it. The Steelers are 8-0. What have they done to get there? They beat the New York Giants, the Denver Broncos, the Houston Texans, Carson Wentz, not even the Eagles, just Carson Wentz, the Browns with Baker Mayfield hurt, and they barely beat the third string quarterback Dallas Cowboys. So I get it. They're 8-0. They're locked in the playoffs. They have a chance to run for the number 1 seed. But did they beat anybody good? And even if they beat Cincinnati this week, they're still not good. They beat Baltimore. Barely. Okay, fine. Baltimore's offense is an absolute mess right now, but I'll still give them that. Fine. That is the one game this year where I've actually respected them winning a game.
Tennessee. They beat Tennessee, but they took a huge lead early in the game because Tennessee didn't decide to show up, and in the second half, if it wasn't for a missed field goal, that game was going to overtime after having a huge lead.
There you go. Again, like sure, they beat a good team. I'm happy with that, but they did it very unimpressingly.
There you have it, unimpressingly.
With that being said, I'm taking Pittsburgh this week.
Go figure.
Come on, George. If you say Pittsburgh's as bad as they are, young Joe Burrow, hot shot quarterback, should be able to take them down. If Garrett Gilbert could almost do it, why can't he?
Are you feeling bold enough to take the Bengals over the Steelers here, George? It is divisional. We know what divisional games do.
I feel like I am cruising for another punishment by doing this, but you know what? Fine. I'll take the bait. I will take Cincinnati to beat Pittsburgh this week. Divisional. Put my faith in Joe Burrow. It's probably stupid because Mixon's still not playing, but whatever. Let's do it.
All right. I like it.
All right, kids. That is what you call peer pressure, and you should not do that. George, you should never fall for peer pressure, but thank you for giving Tyler and us an easy win this week. Pittsburgh, their defense is just good enough. Like George mentioned there at the end, Mixon is not practicing, could miss another week. Not a huge fan of even Gio this week because of how good Pittsburgh's defense is. If Mixon can't play from a fantasy perspective, Pittsburgh all the way. And that really hurts me to say.
Yeah, Big Ben's not practicing though. We failed to mention that. He did injure both knees last week, but there was a positive COVID test for Pittsburgh, and Big Ben was deemed a close contact, so he will be on the COVID list all week. If you do have Big Ben, don't be afraid. As long as he tests negative all week, he should be cleared in time to still play this week. So if you have him in fantasy and you need to start him, don't be afraid. Throw him in your lineup.
He does have a couple of knee injuries he's dealing with, though, from that one bad hit he took before halftime from last week. So he might be hobbled a little bit, but he'll probably play. We've seen Ben play through too many injuries in his career.
Absolutely. And speaking of too many injuries, how about the San Francisco 49ers?
I knew where you were going with that one.
Well, and they're taking on the New Orleans Saints. They're 9-point underdogs. I don't really have any way the Saints lose this game. The 49ers are just that beaten up. So I just want to ask you guys, do you remember how good this matchup was last year?
Yeah.
Back and forth, points scored galore.
It's in the dome. Days. They could have that track meet kind of feel, and everyone's just running up and down the field. And now New Orleans is probably just going to run away with it. It's kind of disappointing, you're right, because that game was so good last year, and I was really looking forward to a rematch.
If we're being honest, that's just how games have been in 2020 in general. Like, all of the games that we were looking forward to this year, Thursday night games, Monday night games, Sunday night games, all of the primetime games that we were looking forward to, they all just seem to fall apart. Either one team gets hurt or one team ends up not being as good as we had hoped. And yeah, I mean, primetime in general has been really disappointing this year.
Yeah, you're not wrong with the primetime disappointment, or at least the matchups we thought would be good would be disappointing. Sometimes those really bad teams have had close games that come down to the wire, but they've been hard to sit through to watch until the end of the game. Unfortunately, I feel like this game might be trending in that direction. The Saints looked so good. I know last week, the 49ers did not. I can't even tell you who's in or out at this point because their injury list is so long. So let's just move on to hopefully a better game. Some may say this is the game of the week. It's still in the NFC West division. It's the Seattle Seahawks at the Los Angeles Rams, and we're all taking Seattle. I think George switched his pick, but that's besides the point. I do like Seattle to bounce back after their defeat last week against the Buffalo Bills. The Rams are coming off of a bye, so maybe McVay will have some fun stuff dialed up, but I think Russ will squeak out a victory in the fourth quarter like he does so often.
I understand that the Rams have looked good lately and Seattle is coming off a bad loss, but I'm really surprised to see that Seattle's actually underdogs in this game, especially with all three of us agreeing to take Seattle. I mean, it's only a 1.5 point underdog, but still, to see the Rams favored is really surprising to me.
Why do you think the Rams are favored in this, though? I mean, I've always felt this season like Seattle's a more complete team, and the only thing I can see that they're missing is Chris Carson is still up in the air. but the running game hasn't really been as big of a deal for them as it has been in the past, and they're still getting a lot of production out of DJ Dallas.
I don't think it's the offense that has the Rams favored. I think it's the defense. I think that Seattle's defense has been really just bad. They have the 31st ranked defense against the pass in general, and it was exposed last week. I mean, yes, we've seen Seattle in really close games battling it out to the last minute and getting that last second touchdown or field goal to win the game. But the reason they're even having to do that against teams that we expected them to beat easily is because the defense is giving up so many points. So if you can find a team that has a decent defense to hold down Russell Wilson and this high powered offense, even just a little bit, they're going to win. I mean, I think that's why the Rams are favored. And, speaking of good defense versus good offense, how about the matchup of Jalen Ramsey versus DK Metcalf? I think this is going to be an exciting one on one matchup that I'm going to really want to target into all game. Who do you guys see winning that matchup? Do you think DK still has a big day, or do you think he's going to get shut down?
We always say it's either a DK week or a Lockett week, and I think because of that matchup, it's going to be a Lockett week. I don't know if DK is going to be completely held silent, but we've seen him go for 5 fantasy points. Maybe like the modest 2 catches for 40 yards. We could see that kind of thing happen.
I'm actually of the mindset that Jalen Ramsey won't be shadowing DK Metcalf because Tyler Lockett is so good. I think Ramsey will stick to a side for most of the game, and then whoever lines up across from him, that's who he'll face. So I don't actually see that matchup being a bigger role in this game. I think Ramsey can shut down pretty much anyone in the league, so he'll make it tough for whoever's lined up against him. But I'm more intrigued after last week and the Buffalo Bills getting to Russell Wilson is, does Seattle have an answer for Aaron Donald? I know he's been up and down with production, some games held without a tackle, and then some games has multiple sacks. I think Aaron Donald is the difference maker in this matchup against that offensive line.
I think there's a lot of difference makers. I think that this is honestly just a really good matchup. I'm excited to see this game. I'm surprised that it's a 4 o'clock game. I would have loved to see the Rams and Seahawks play on Sunday night or Monday night over either of those games, to be honest. It's going to be an exciting game. I could see either team winning, but we do all have Seattle, so let's see what happens.
So before we go off of this game, I'm going to say something that will probably be completely dumb and will be completely irrelevant after quarter number 2. But
Like everything
we're going to
else we
go with
say.
it. Pretty much, yeah, actually, except for CMC last week.
Shots
So I'm
fired.
going to throw in a bold prediction that the Seattle Seahawks porous defense will hold the Los Angeles Rams to 14 or less points. I think
Per
we
quarter,
see
right?
no
Per-
in the game. I think we see those Jared Goff disappearance games and occasionally, and this might be one of them this week. I just have a feeling we're going to go with Seahawks defense holds the Rams to 14 or less.
George, I know you got one right last week, but the point of bold predictions is still to predict something that could actually happen. This isn't even close. Come on, buddy. But thanks for another victory. George isn't getting a bold prediction right. I'll probably eat these words later, but
I'm
for
keeping this
now,
on my demo reel for next week when I do get it right and I can just play it all back and that's it.
okay, I guess we'll have to wait and see. George going, I don't know what the word is because my vocabulary is awful. Whatever the word for more bold is, or the boldest to ever happen,
You can say
whatever that word
bananas
is.
because I mean you guys seem to love when I say that about people going off in fantasy. So
It's the boat. It's the boldest of all time. It's the boat.
All right, George, that's the boat, the boldest of all time. We got to move on because my head is about to explode with that bold prediction. Let's talk about the Buffalo Bills who beat the Seattle Seahawks because they put up 41 points. George, that's 41, not 14, against the Arizona Cardinals. Buffalo, they're coming off a big win. I'm going to stick with them. I think they keep rolling. Josh Allen looked back. Kyler Murray looked good running the ball. And we talked about how good Miami's defense is. I think Buffalo squeaks out a close victory.
I agree with you there, Cody. I do like Buffalo in this matchup. I think Arizona's going to hang around, just like you said. I do think it'll be a close game, but Buffalo has really impressed me. I know from a fantasy standpoint, I have the Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs hookup in one of our leagues together, and it has been a blessing to have. I have won games just because of those two before. And speaking fantasy, we saw Josh Allen dominate early on in the season and then completely fall off for a few weeks, and people were panicking saying I need to replace him, I need a new quarterback. And then he comes back last week, has 400 yards and 4 touchdowns, and just blows people away in their fantasy matchups. So, do you guys trust Josh Allen moving forward? Do you think he's going to go back to his old ways of putting up big points, or do you think that this week was just a fluke and we should still be cautious?
I think that this week he played Seattle's defense, and I'm just making my self sound even more dumb by saying it.
Yeah. Thanks for. I mean, it's only been 3 minutes in the show, and you've already realized how bad of a pick that is. But so I like Josh Allen going forward. I do think he'll be fantasy relevant the rest of the season. The one thing I do think you should watch out for, and this is completely dependent on your where your team is at, but if you're in a good place, you might want to consider moving him for a different quarterback because his playoff schedule is quite brutal. Trying to pull it up right now, but the three teams he would play weeks was that 14, 15, and 16 are all tough matchups. So if you're a team that has a decent lead, you're not fighting week in and week out, you might want to be able to take a hit the next week or two at quarterback for a guy that might have a better matchup in the fantasy playoffs. But again, that's completely based on what your team standings are.
Yeah, he faces Pittsburgh in week 14, which is the fifth ranked team against the quarterback. Faces the Broncos in week 15, which is an easier matchup. They're 24th against the quarterback, although we've seen them shut down quarterbacks in the past. And then week 16 is the New England Patriots, who are the third ranked team against the quarterback.
And then again, like you mentioned, Denver, and we saw Joe Flacco light up the Patriots this week. So numbers can always be a stray. So I'm not saying give away Josh Allen, but something to keep in the back of your mind.
So we've talked enough about the Bills here now. Cody, you and I both picked the Bills in this matchup. George, you did not. Why are you going with the Cardinals?
I think the Bills' offensive outburst, as much as I think they're going to be better than they were in this few weeks they were struggling, was a little bit given to Seattle, and maybe they were just finally like playing with some adrenaline because they were struggling and they were like, "Oh my god, we need to turn this around." Arizona has proven to be a really tough team to hang with. Their offense is dynamic. I think that Kyler Murray to DeAndre Hopkins hookup is just as good or better than that Josh Allen to Stephon Diggs hookup. I don't know. It's going to be a tough game. They're playing it inside, which is good for Arizona. If they're playing up in Buffalo, I think I would definitely still go with Buffalo. But I'm going to go with Arizona, and weirdly enough, they're the favorite. So I'll take the only person picking the favorite pick again. Sure.
All right, guys, it is time for my bold prediction that will most likely be wrong. In this matchup, we
It can't be
have,
worse than George's.
well, no, nothing's worse than Georgia's, but I have Josh Allen, who is an underrated mobile quarterback. He's great with his legs, although we really don't talk about it that often. Loves the 1 yard quarterback sneaks in the red zone. And then we have Kyler Murray, who has actually outperformed Lamar Jackson with his legs this season, and he's not getting enough credit for it either. So we have two mobile quarterbacks. I also see in a game like this where it could be close, it could be high scoring, maybe drawing up some trick plays that one of them will catch a touchdown. So my bold prediction for this week is that Josh Allen and Kyler Murray will combine for 4 or more non-passing touchdowns. They will rush or catch 4 or more combined touchdowns.
That's bold, but it's not the boat.
It's not
It
the
is
boat.
definitely not the boat.
George takes the boat this week.
That's a good one. I like it. Kyler Murray has been balling out, and they seem to like to call design runs to read options down in the red zone. I think that trend continues. I'm really hoping though one of them catches a pass. Maybe an Arizona special, a
Oh,
dilly dilly in the
Arizona
desert.
special.
Will you stop taking all the credit away from Chicago? Jeez.
Okay, that was a good joke, George. That was funny. It made me laugh.
I love how you said
But
Dilly
let's.
Dilly in the desert instead of Billy Billy and went with the Buffalo special. You had such an opportunity there, and
Oh
you just
no.
missed it.
I thought we only pointed out George's flaws. Why are we attacking me now?
You know what? George had a terrible, terrible bowl prediction this week. Can we just talk about
My
that?
face looked
Exactly.
pretty fine though on social media, let's be honest.
You're so pretty.
Well, maybe that makeup got to you. But anyways, let's move on to the Sunday night matchup. Another one of those games that was like it should be such a good one, and now the teams are where they are, and it's like, do I even want to watch this game? And that is the Baltimore Ravens at the New England Patriots. Baltimore hasn't been the best team this year, but they definitely haven't been as bad as the New England Patriots. I know I was on the Cam Newton hype train after the first 2 weeks. That has let me down. I'm gonna go with Baltimore, but did you guys see, Lamar Jackson was quoted today saying that the defenses are calling out our plays? I thought that was an interesting fact to say or state out at this point in the season. I mean, we know they're a run first team by a long margin. So what are you guys' thoughts on that?
Well, it's not surprising because have you guys ever played Madden and you have like those 3 or 4 set plays that always seem to work for you? So you just call them over again and over again and over again until you play somebody that really knows your style and they just defend against those 4 plays because they know that's all you like to do. That's basically what I'm seeing in Baltimore. They have the same exact plays that have worked for them in the past, so they just keep doing them over and over again. I'm not surprised that defenses are figuring that out. The Titans kind of figured that out in the playoffs last year, and since then we have seen Baltimore not really shine offensively the way that we expected.
I'll look at this from two perspectives. One, you do not want your star quarterback saying that when you're coming in to play a Bill Belichick coach team, because as bad as they've been struggling, Belichick can at least get a team together defensively to defend something like that. From the other side, what is up with Harbaugh not calling the audible, doing some different things, coming up with something exotic? He's a Super Bowl winning coach. I feel like he still has the training wheels on Lamar a little bit. If you hear him saying something like that, he's got to be able to handle more than the 4 or 5 plays that Tyler suggests. So, what is up with that from his perspective? He has to know that Lamar can handle more. And as much as I'm, still skeptical on Lamar, he's been in the league for how long? He can do more than that.
It is his third season, so that is always suspect. You got to remember though, Harbaugh is not an offensive guy. He's his background's in special teams and just a good overall leader. So definitely as a head coach, you have to have the pulse on your team and know when to push your players. But some of that would probably fall on the guy actually calling plays there in Baltimore. I don't know what much else to say about this game. I know Tyler mentioned earlier in the show, Damian Harris left the game with a pretty brutal head injury, concussion. So I'm not really starting we weren't really starting any of the running backs before. I don't think from a fantasy perspective, you're starting any fantasy running backs from New England this week. I'm not a huge fan of Cam this week. I think the Patriots are going to struggle to score points. Baltimore should win this one pretty easily.
You slipped Damian Harrison in there, and Snacks did sign with Seattle this week. That defense is going to be so much better. Just saying.
He signed with Seattle like 3 weeks ago and's been on the practice squad.
Well, he's got elevated to the active roster.
Gotcha. He needed time to not eat as many snacks. That's what they were saying. So, I mean, I'm not judging the man. I eat plenty enough snacks, so no one come at me for that. But, anyways, we're done talking about snacks and his eating habits because he is definitely a force to be reckoned with there in the middle. Still makes your bold prediction incredibly insane. But we got one more game. It's the Monday Night Football game. It's the Minnesota Vikings at the Chicago Bears. I can't stand either of these teams. David Montgomery is questionable with a concussion. I don't know who their backup running back is at this point. I don't think Dalvin Cook has a huge game, but I think he's still productive. I just don't like Nick Foles. I tried a couple weeks ago picking Chicago because people were like, you're not giving them any credit. Picked them twice. They lost both games. So if you're a superstitious fan out there, I'm picking them to lose this week, so it might be your week, but give me Minnesota.
Well, I mean, you picked them to lose last week too, and they did. So I don't know if it's any superstition anymore. I think it's just the Bears are finally on the slide. The Nick Foles magic ran out. They used it too soon. You have to know you have to put that in later in the season. It only lasts so many weeks, and that's why they used it all up too early. But do you think that there is a chance that Mitch Trubisky gets in and plays when he's back healthy?
I think he should. I really do. Um, Honestly, Nick Foles has been just so abysmal. That offense was an absolute joke against the Titans. And Mitchell Trubisky, I don't think he deserved to lose the job in the first place. Like, yeah, he had a rough half, but he had your team at 3-0. Having a bad half after a 3-0 start is no reason to be benched. I think they jumped the gun on that. Um, but honestly, benching a guy like Mitchell Trubisky when he was already facing so much negative comments coming into this season, what does that do to your morale? What does that do to your confidence? Like, how do you step in and try to lead your team back into the playoffs after getting benched after a 3-0 start? Like, your confidence can't be very good.
I agree with you. It's the Nick Foles effect. Well, we saw it a little bit. We talked about it a lot in Philadelphia. It appeared to happen in Chicago. He came in, made the pressure too great, stepped in. Hasn't looked good here, but I don't know what it is. They just seem to love Nick Foles. I think Mitch Trubisky's pretty much done in Chicago. And as a Packers fan, that is sad to say.
I don't see Chicago heading in any kind of a good direction anytime soon. So, as a Packers fan, you can still sleep just fine at night knowing the Bears are still going to suck.
Nick Foles told Anthony Miller to run to the L for that game-winning touchdown in that first game, and they're finally piling up the L's that we were talking about, and they're going to get another one this week.
I would not be surprised one bit. But guys, that wraps up our picks for this week. Anybody out there that's listening, as always, tell us who you would pick. Who do you disagree? Who do you agree with? Um, just let us know. Make your picks. Let's have some fun with this. Talk some trash. We talk some trash on George. You guys can talk some trash on us just as much. But
Or you
let's
can
move
talk
on
some more
to
trash
our.
on me and my bowl prediction.
Oh, George, your bold prediction was terrible. It's the boat. You had the boat prediction. But let's move on into our lightning round, guys. So the fantasy trade deadline is fast approaching. It is November 20th for most leagues, but some leagues have it as a different date. Make sure you check with your commissioner, find out when that date is. But with the fantasy trade deadline approaching, let's go with some guys that we are going to buy and sell in some trades. We'll start out with who we're going to buy, move on to who we're going to sell. Cody, you can start us off.
Alrighty. So for me, I mentioned a little bit when we were talking about the Seattle game, but I'm going to go with Chris Carson. He might not be back this week, but I do think he has the carries he'll get. He's been getting the passing targets this year. He's a guy you can probably buy relatively low, depending on who has him in your league. So I'd be out there trying to target Chris Carson, especially because running backs are so hard to come by this season.
For that same reason, I'm going to say go out and get Mike Davis, the running back for the Panthers. He was valuable back when McCaffrey was hurt. As soon as McCaffrey came back, he was dropped in a lot of leagues. Now that McCaffrey's hurt again, he has been picked up as a recent free agent pickup. Most people will value him low and move him. Plus, people are still expecting McCaffrey to be back soon. However, I said it earlier, I think that the Panthers are going to keep losing the next few games. And if they're pretty much out of the playoffs, there's no reason for them to bring McCaffrey back and, you know, give the whole workload to him and get him hurt again. They might as well rest him up, make sure he's good for next season. For that reason, Mike Davis is valuable. Go get him cheap, have him win you some games.
Nick Chubb has been out of the lineup for a long time, and he's finally coming back this week. And I think now is the time if you are desperate for a running back. He's probably the top running back you can get for the cheapest. He shouldn't have a problem with splitting with Kareem Hunt. Kareem Hunt and him were both fantasy eligible or fantasy relevant before. I think they could both be again. And if you can't get him this week, I feel like there's a chance they could ease him back in this week with how well Hunt's been doing. So maybe even next week, if your trade deadline is the 20th, like Tyler suggested, you might even be able to get him a little bit cheaper if you don't like the asking price this week. But go out and get Nick Chubb. He's going to be the top running back that it will be the cheapest here at the deadline.
And moving on to the players that we're going to sell, I'll start us off with another running back. I'm going to look at Todd Gurley. Now, Todd Gurley has put up some great numbers this season. Everyone, though, knows his knee injuries. We've seen times where he's disappeared from games, and he's already at 9 touchdowns for the season, and he only has 584 yards. So the yardage isn't the best. It's still over 3 yards average, but it's not the best. And the 9 touchdowns, what scares me the most. I think for the second half of the season, we'll see that number cut in half, which just makes him not as fantasy relevant. So like a guy for like Chris Carson, Todd Gurley for Chris Carson. That's like a move I'm out there looking to make.
So the next guy that I would like to talk about would be Daryl Henderson, running back for the Rams. You know, we talked about earlier in the show that Daryl Henderson is battling a bit of an injury. They're coming off a bye, and I could very well see Cam Akers taking over as the starter or Malcolm Brown taking over as the starter, or as frustrating as that backfield is, someone else that we've never heard of taking over as the starter. But Daryl Henderson has been the starter for the last few weeks. He's been getting the points, so he does have some value. You can find somebody who trusts him a little bit more and try to get something good out of him. get someone more consistent. Go out and sell Daryl Henderson.
As somebody who's not buying into the Jake Lewton hype and not liking the uncertainty at quarterback for the Jacksonville Jaguars, I'm going to go ahead and sell their number one receiver, DJ Chark. Chark went off last week, and he's been pretty good most of the season, but I think he's going to be at his highest value you're going to see him at now. I don't think he's going to be the greatest greatest wide receiver down the stretch either, because you're going to see a team in transition. They're going to be switching quarterbacks, potentially going back to Gardner Minshew, and they might be trying to get more of the young talent involved because they're looking towards the future. So you could see more Laviska Shenault down the stretch. So I'm not completely sold on DJ Chark. Sell him after his big week right now.
I got to say, George, I just wanted to comment on that one. I know this is not what we do for the lightning round, but I had to chime in. DJ Chark has actually been complaining to the coaches that he has not been getting enough targets during the season. He has been very upset about it. And Jake Lewton stepped in and gave him 12 targets in the game. That is why we saw one of his best games of the season. If Lewton performs well against the Packers, and Lewton looks like he will be the starter moving forward, Chark is his favorite weapon. You might actually get some good garbage time points out of DJ Chark this season. So I think you got to watch this matchup this week closely. If Minshew is coming back, yeah, go ahead. Sell Chark while he's high.
Yeah, that's a great point. I will second what Tyler just said. I do think Chark has some value. But anyways, that's our lightning round. Just a few players on who you should buy or sell at the trade deadline. Always be out there being active in your leagues. That's what makes fantasy the most fun. Anyways, just thanks for listening to another episode of the Couch GMs. As always, you can find us on all the social platforms at the Couch GMs. You can leave comments, reviews. We'd greatly appreciate it, and we're always here for you guys.
Guys, stop tweeting at your favorite team and yelling at them, telling them to make certain moves. They're not going to listen to you. But you know who will listen? Us. That's right. We will listen to you. There's a little bit of Couch GMs in all of us. Please get involved. Ask us some questions. Tell us your picks. Suggest some punishments. Talk some trash. If you want to vent about your favorite team making stupid moves, vent to us. We'll listen. We'll talk it out with you. Make this podcast more fun for you and for us by letting your inner Couch GM out and getting involved.
Also, stop tweeting at Chris Carson complaining that he's out with an injury. The dude's trying to work back. This has been a Fantasy PSA, and this has also been the Couch GMs podcast. For Tyler Snyder and Cody Roadcap, I'm George Kerth, and we will see you all next week.